So before we start reading Oedipus, there are some terms that we need to know. There's some background, there's some history that we need to get into, just like we did with Shakespeare. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is Greek drama. This is some of the earliest writing ever recorded, some of the earliest plays that have ever been recorded. They're from thousands of years ago, long before Shakespeare. So we're looking at some of the earliest writing. Um, and this is kind of the birth of drama. How did um, plays? Who came up with the idea for a play for people to act out a made-up story? Storytelling had been around forever, right? People would just sit around and tell stories, but to actually act it out in a formal way. This is generally accepted is how this kind of thing started. So, as a lot of things, because religion kind of was the center of um, lots and lots of different cultures, drama had its origins in religious ceremony. So, it started out that people would perform song rites, essentially prayers to the gods, and we're talking about like Greek mythology gods, like Dionysus, god of wine, and other things. And you have annual festivals for the gods, and so people would get together during those festivals and um, perform these songs essentially. Um, Small groups of shepherds would perform the songs to the gods, and then that grew into a formal group of 50 men that would form the chorus. Originally, there were no actors. It was just, and went from songs to just saying the story out loud. And they would all, have it memorized, and they would all say it in unison. 50 people all saying the exact same words. They would recite the story in unison, and it'd be a story about the gods and praising them and that kind of thing. Um, and the father of drama is known as Thespis. Um, that's why if you've ever heard someone say, "Oh, that person's such a thespian," um, thespian means that you're someone who loves to act or perform. Because Thespis is the father of drama. He's the first one to separate the principal actor from the chorus, and that was in 550 BC. That was a long time ago, right? I mean, you know, in our terms. Uh, so, and then in the fifth century, this is much later, long time later, um, Aeschylus added the second main actor. So for the longest, hundreds of years, um, the only kind of acting that was going on is you had the chorus saying what was going on, and then um, one person kind of doing all the acting. And then for some reason, someone in the fifth century named Aeschylus decided, hey, wait a second. I know we've always done it with just one person, but since we have multiple characters, what if we added a second person? And strangely enough, it took a while until somebody else came up with the idea of acting a third person. Wait, if we do it with two, how about three? And then kind of went from there, right? Um, oh, there you go. Modern word. Thespian refers to an actor or actress. All right. Okay, so you have these religious festivals. The big one was 6 days in March in Athens. Um, they just performed all day. This is a big performance, festival. Courts were closed. Prisoners were released. I mean, it was so important that people went to these plays that they're like, okay, let the prisoners go to the plays. And this seems a little weird now, like even women were allowed to attend. Well, back then, women weren't allowed to do anything, right? So the fact that they allowed women to attend these plays because they were so important. Um, and this whole thing was state subsidized. So it wasn't paid for privately, it was paid for by, tax dollars. Um, and it was all free to everybody, right? Okay, music was included in the plays, live music, of course. Plays were presented often in tetralogies, so four, series of four plays, three tragedies, and a comedy. Prizes were awarded. It's very prestigious if you won Top prize. What were the prizes? I don't know. A wreath, a vase. Um, hey, what's the difference between a vase and a vase? About $200. Okay, moving on. So okay, it was festivals. In the 100 years between 480 and 380 BC. That's how long ago we're talking. More than 2,000 plays were performed in the festivals. 20 per festival. That's a lot. Guess how many we still have to this day? Not a lot. I mean, it makes sense that if these things were written down, that the papers wouldn't have been kept, right? Um, Also, it's very expensive to like copy, plays down and write them out. So, all right. So here's a few terms. We've got tragodoy, which means goat song. Don't ask me why that turns into tragedy. I guess it's a tragedy to listen to goats because they sound so terrible or something. Kamasoidoi, you can imagine, turns into common song or comedy, right? Because comedy is, for the common people, right? I mean, that's what Shakespeare wrote comedies for. He wasn't writing comedies for the kings and queens. Those are the tragedies or the histories, right? And then drama comes from the Greek word meaning action, which is interesting because we think of drama as the opposite of action movies. But to the Greeks, drama is action, it is exciting, it is interesting, right? So, and well, we'll get into that later. Okay, so the evolution of the theater. Sorry, I'm in the way there. The theatre or the theater. So how did all this evolve? Well, started with the religious gatherings, as we mentioned. Then it turns into more organized street corner performances where people are, reciting these stories. And then, they got more and more popular. You had to go out to big fields to accommodate, and then eventually to big stadiums, right? Um, and as far as the stadium went, you'd have the skene, the orchestra, uh, which is the skene was the tent where it's performed, and the orchestra is the circle where this orchestra is the circle where the actors performed, and the tent, um, was overhead. Okay. Uh, the actors were called hypocrites, which kind of makes sense, right? Because the word hypocrite means you say one thing, but you act a different way. And so these actors are acting differently than they would normally act. They have two different personalities. So, it makes sense to call them a hypocrite. We already talked about Deus Ex Machina from Shakespeare, the machine, God from the machine. Um, this is literally where, if you look at the literal translation, they're lowering someone from above. Um, to like with angel wings on or something like that. Um, that looks fake. Okay, they did have costumes. They were larger than life, especially if you're in a stadium. You'd have to have big costumes with bright colors for anybody to see anything. But they were over exaggerated masks and that kind of thing. And the mask somehow contained like a megaphone inside, so you can project your voice. Uh, and they also let us know who the characters were. So that's how you can identify them as this big giant mask. Oh, that's so and so. Of course, there are no women actors. I mean, that goes all the way through Shakespeare's time. I don't know why there's a picture of this. I don't think I made this presentation. I think we stole it from the sophomores, actually. Sophomore teachers. Anyway, okay, so then there's different parts of the play. We have the prologue, which is the opening. It's very similar to Shakespeare. Of course, Shakespeare's writing many, 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 many hundreds of years later. Um, but there's a speech by the principal actor. You have the Prados, the entrance of the chorus. Now, the chorus here is not just a group of people that come out and explain the play like they did in Romeo and Juliet. They're actually part of the play. They're characters. In Oedipus, they're going to be the townspeople or the elders, essentially. Um, yeah, so there's that. Then you have the more parts of the play. You have different episodes. Usually, you have 5 episodes, and then in between each episode is a stacima, which is the choral ode. It's a song by the chorus, but you'll see they're pretty easy to identify. Um, in this play, it'll be just a bunch of prayers. Essentially, they're praying to the gods, and then you have the Exodus, which is the departure of the chorus. I don't know why these are out of order. So the chorus leaves. Okay, so how is violence portrayed on on stage? Well, it wasn't. There's lots of violence in Greek plays, but it would occur off stage, and then a character would come back like with blood all over him and say, "Oh my gosh, it's so horrible! This is what happened," and describe something really, really violent. Um, this is probably a good place to say that Greek tragedies are synonymous with just horrible, horrible things happening. If you watch a movie or watch a TV show or play or something where just the worst, most awful things happen, a lot of times the critics will say, "Oh, that was just like a Greek tragedy." Uh, there are some things that you just wouldn't believe. You're like, "Wow, that was crazy." Shakespeare does this in some of his plays. King Lear is a total Greek tragedy. Just the worst possible things you could ever imagine happen to that guy. Like, what else could possibly happen to that one person? Um, I think that's the one where he gouges his eyes out on stage. So, in any case, there's lots of violence. It's just not portrayed on. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the dog panting. She just came from outside. Calm down, buddy. Okay. What is that strange noise, Mr. Kramer? All right, so let's talk about some of the famous playwrights. We've got Aeschylus, who we uh, already mentioned, Sophocles, who's the author of Oedipus, and he lived a long life, by the way, and Euripides, who wrote tragedies. Oh, and Aristophanes, my favorite. Oh man, his plays are awesome. Wrote comedies; they're very funny. Okay. Yeah, so the play stressed more moral concepts of restraint and humility. Um, we'll talk about hubris in a second, but there's really one main thing that the plays weren't just for entertainment, they were to instruct. Um, they preached against hubris, which is pride of mortals who think they can outwit the gods. Almost all the plays, that was the theme, right? Don't try to outsmart the gods. Don't try to do things when something is the gods give you a what do you call it when they tell you what's going to happen, or not a premonition, but they tell you, hey, this is what's going to happen to your life, and you're like, nope, not, I'm going to trick you, I'm going to get out of it, and you never do. Right. So that's the main thing. Okay, let's talk about Sophocles. He represented the status quo. So he just kind of wrote plays about what's currently happening, versus Euripides questioned the establishment and said, no, we shouldn't accept that this is the way things are. We should change things. But let's focus on Sophocles, since he wrote Oedipus. Um, he was born, he had just the best timeline of his life. He was born just before the golden age of Athens. So he basically lives through the golden age, and he died a year before the fall of Athens. So he lived like during the best time that you could live in Athens, right? Lived in Colonus. He was a general, a priest, political leader, imperial treasurer, dramatist. Like, he did everything. So there's a term in they used we use today called a Renaissance man. A Renaissance man is someone who's really good at a lot of different things, right? The Greeks had a term too. It was I don't know if it's pronounced arete or arete or something, but it was excellence in all categories. That was Sophocles. Like he did everything, right? Uh, he won 30 prizes. 20 of them were first prizes at the Athenian festivals. He wrote 120 plays, and of those, we have 7. Um, I'll take them. Not a lot, but 27-year-long Peloponnesian War influenced King Oedipus. The King Oedipus is not about the war, but there's things, if you know the history of the Peloponnesian War, that are in there. He wrote King Oedipus at age 65 and didn't stop writing until very, very old. He wrote Oedipus at Colonus. So there's 3 Oedipus plays. You'll read the second one next year. Um, but the third one is Oedipus at Colonus. He wrote it at 90 as a defense in a trial. Don't ask. I don't. Okay, would you like to defend your client? No, just read this play. Yeah, I don't. Okay, innovations by Sophocles. What did Sophocles add to the whole playwriting thing? What did he do that nobody else did, right? How did he advance uh, plays? Well, one, he introduced painted scenery, so he made it a lot more interesting. Hey, why don't we have background instead of just nothing? He added the third actor. We talked about that at the same time on the stage. And actually, I think there's 3 actors and the chorus. So technically, and the chorus is like 15, 20 people. So uh, increase the size of the chorus to 15. So there's a lot of people on stage. We're not talking about a small production here. He increased the size of the chorus to 15 and decreased the number of choral odes, which is nice because the choral odes are not the most exciting things ever you'll see. Now, this is very important. If you've been zoning out, zone back in. So dramatic irony. This is really where dramatic irony, comes from. Irony is a term used to describe a contrast between what appears to be and what really is. There's several different types. You already know these, but dramatic irony is the one we want to focus on. Dramatic irony refers to a situation in which events or facts not known to a character on stage or in a fictional work are known to another character or the audience. So in Oedipus, it's actually the whole thing because Oedipus is based on kind of a myth that people are already familiar with. And so we already know the myth. The audience goes in already knowing the story that happens before Oedipus takes place. And so, but there's characters in the story who aren't familiar with that backstory. So the whole time we're like, oh, we know who you are, but you don't even know who you are, kind of thing. You'll see, it'll make sense. So the whole thing is heightened, is more dramatized, more suspenseful, is more exciting, more dramatic because we know what's going on and a lot of the characters don't. And it makes us like fear for them. It makes us like, oh no, don't do that. No, that kind of thing. It's like in a horror movie, if you know the monster is hiding in the closet and the person's like going to the closet and you're just waiting for the monster to jump out because you know he or she is already there, right? Okay. Dramatic irony played a major role in Greek drama since the audience was familiar with the stories before they arrived at the theater. I already said that. Okay, now Aristotle is also important because, and he wrote long before, Sophocles, because he kind of created a template for Greek tragedy, Greek drama. Um, so he wrote, the subject of tragedy is the struggle and downfall of a hero. The aim of a tragedy is to bring about catharsis. Catharsis is a process that causes the audience to experience pity and fear and then purges them of these emotions so they leave the theater feeling cleansed and uplifted. Think about a film that you've seen that is so heavy and so dark and so tragic and so horrible. And the end is like the most tragic part. And there's absolutely no room for feeling good at all. Like there's no redeeming qualities, just everything ends horribly. You would almost call what is the Avengers movie that, except for the next Avengers movie kind of brought everything back out of that. But if everything just ended with whatever it was, Infinity War or whatever, um, then that would you'd be lacking some catharsis there. The movie that comes to my mind is called United 93, I think, is about the 9/11 attacks, and it was the airplane that went down before it actually crashed. It got taken over by terrorists. People think they were heading towards the White House, and the people on the plane took the plane back. And you would think that that would bring about catharsis, um, so you can leave the theater feeling cleansed and uplifted. But they took the plane back and then it crashed and everybody died. And that's how the movie ends. It just goes down. The title card comes up, says all these people died. And man, I remember when I saw that in the theater, nobody breathed. Like when that movie ended, it was silent when everybody walked out of the theater. I've never experienced that before because there was no catharsis. Catharsis is you see horrible, awful things happen, but at the very end, there's some kind of redeeming quality, redeeming value where you just go, oh, okay, things are going to be okay. Um, that's what Greek tragedies try to do. Okay, so he also Aristotle. We're still talking about what Aristotle did for Greek tragedies. Created the tragic hero, who still exists today. Um, he was in Shakespeare. Must pass from happiness to misery. So in order to have a tragic hero, you have to have all these different things. So the person has to start happy and then just go to absolute misery. Check. Must belong to a distinguished family. So this is all true in Romeo and Juliet too. Check. Must not be utterly evil or perfectly virtuous. It's not a villain, and it's not an archetypal hero. It's not the typical hero that's like perfect and does everything right. Has some flaws, right? In fact, the downfall must come because of some flaw of character or error in judgment, which of course is the tragic flaw, which Aristotle called hamartia. Uh, and the hero must recognize clearly, although too late, the error of his ways. He has to go, oh man, this is my fault, right? And take responsibility for his actions. So, respond with dignity and nobility and realize, he doesn't fight it, realizes, okay, this is my fault. I was wrong. Tragic hero. Oh, I thought there was more. So, in the course of Oedipus, we'll be looking for the tragic hero, and we'll go through the play. Pause. It's a play. Usually we'd read it together in class, but I'll read the parts. You can answer questions. As far as the rest of it goes, I haven't quite decided yet. We may have a worksheet to do that you can submit electronically to kind of track the tragic hero and track, uh, you know, um, dramatic irony and that kind of stuff. So as far as a quiz at the end, I haven't decided yet, but at least now we can start reading Oedipus. So thank you for listening.